This is Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa. The story of resurgent and burgeoning Africa is here, only on the Pulse of Africa channel. Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa.
A very warm welcome to Pulse of Africa News. Tonight, we dive into the stories shaping our continent with voices that inspire and moments that move us forward. I'm Tensai Gabiao, and I'm thrilled you are here with us. Let's start with Algeria. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune emphasized the state's determination to continue the reform process and implement development programs, noting that Algeria has achieved accomplishments in various fields. In his address to the nation before both houses of parliament at the Palace of Nations, President Tebboune expressed his conviction that reforms are the ongoing process to establish governance for the people and by the people, adding, "We will continue implementing sustainable development programs." In this regard, he commended Algeria's achievements in multiple sectors, stressing that he announced figures reflect reality at a time when certain parties are attempting to obscure these accomplishments. He pointed to progress in mining, solar energy, and rail transport, declaring, "I now order the Prime Minister to begin the establishment of 2 water stations in Tindouf and Tamanrasset." The president further highlighted Algeria's economic progress, stating that the country has entered a decisive economic phase driven by ongoing investment momentum, pointing to the significant number of investment projects currently underway across the nation. On social policy, President Tebboune reaffirmed Algeria's commitment to the social character of the state in line with the 1st of November 1954 declaration. "Algeria is a social state, and we will not go off this course," he declared. The President of the Republic also renewed his commitment to political dialogue with parties, recalling his previous pledges. Gabonese President Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema on Thursday announced the formation of a new government comprising 31 members. The cabinet reshuffle follows legislative and local elections held in late 2025. Several new ministers were appointed to key posts, including the Interior, Foreign Affairs, Justice, Petroleum, and Economy and Finance portfolios. The president retained several close allies in key sovereign portfolios. The new government includes 11 women and 20 men. Under Gabon's constitution, the president also serves as head of government. The African Union has renewed its full readiness to work closely with all concerned Sudanese parties, as well as with regional and international partners, to support efforts aimed at achieving a ceasefire, facilitating humanitarian access, and reaching a comprehensive political solution in Sudan. In a congratulatory message to the government and people of Sudan on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the country's independence, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mohamed Ali Youssef, said that the African Union remains committed to an African-led and Sudanese-owned process that responds to the aspirations of the Sudanese people for peace, dignity, and a stable future. In a statement issued Thursday, the African Union reiterated its full readiness to work closely with all relevant Sudanese parties, as well as with regional and international partners, to support efforts aimed at achieving a ceasefire, facilitating the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and reaching a comprehensive political solution. Youssef added that the Sudan marks 70 years of independence. Let this moment not be merely a reflection on the past, but a renewal of commitment to ending the war and restoring the promise of a unified Sudan living in peace. New roads, hotels, and services are welcoming visitors to Ethiopia's historic sites and natural wonders. Tourism creates jobs and celebrates our culture. Investing in visitors, invest in our future. President John Dramani Mahama has declared that Ghana is rising again after a year of economic stabilization and reforms, pledging an accelerated expansion of social, economic, and governance programs in 2026 under his reset agenda. In his New Year address to the nation, the president said the country had emerged from severe distress inherited at the start of his administration and was now on a path of recovery anchored in discipline, credibility, and renewed confidence.
1 year ago, we inherited a nation in distress, an economy on its knees, unemployment crushing our youth, infrastructure crumbling, public trust eroded, and hope dimming in the eyes of our people. We were told that the recovery would take a generation, but I knew something our critics did not know. I knew the resilient spirit of the Ghanaian people. At the dawn of the new year, I stand before you to say our beloved nation Ghana is rising again. We've accomplished a lot together in the past 12 months through prudent management and difficult but necessary reforms.
Reflecting on his first year in office, ahead of the anniversary of his swearing-in, the president described his pledge to reset the country as a binding commitment rather than political rhetoric. President Mahama pointed to macroeconomic gains as evidence of progress, noting a sharp reduction in inflation and improving currency performance. He also said Ghana had achieved relative currency stability and was on course to be ranked among the world's best performing currencies in 2025, while business confidence had been restored, resulting in increased domestic and foreign direct investment.
We've reduced inflation from the distressing levels above 23% by the end of 2024 and are hopeful to end 2025 with inflation at single digits of just above 5%. We have achieved relative currency stability and on track to be ranked among the best performing currencies in the world for 2025. We're accelerating economic growth and creating more opportunities for our young people. We've restored business confidence and have seen a significant increase in both domestic and foreign direct investment. We've restored Ghana's credibility with our international partners, successfully completed the renegotiation of our debt obligations on terms that protect our sovereignty while at the same time ensuring sustainability.
On debt and international relations, the president said Ghana had successfully renegotiated its debt obligations on terms that protect our sovereignty while ensuring stability, and was beginning the process of exiting the IMF program with dignity, not as supplicants, but as partners. President Mahama said economic recovery was translating into growth across key sectors, including construction, manufacturing, agriculture, and services, creating new employment for opportunities for young people, whom he described as the Ghana's greatest resource. President Samia Suluhu Hassan has called on Tanzanians to prepare for the full implementation of the National Development Vision 2050, which is set to begin in 2026, emphasizing unity, discipline, and long-term planning. In her New Year's Eve address from Tungu, Zanzibar, the president said Vision 2050 will guide Tanzania's transformation into a competitive, inclusive, and resilient economy. She explained that the government is launching a 3-year medium-term plan as the first step toward achieving the 2050 objectives. The president highlighted that the strategy focuses on expanding digital platforms for tax collection and payments, tightening oversight of public funds, and reducing revenue leakages. Samia emphasized that Vision 2050 builds on previous national frameworks and aligns economic growth with social development, environmental stability, and technological advancement. Collaboration with the private sector and development partners, she added, will be critical for success. The goal of Vision 2050 is to ensure that economic growth translates into tangible benefits for citizens, jobs, better services, and improved standard of living, the president said. She urged citizens to embrace unity, patriotism, and responsible participation in governance to ensure that the plan is implemented successfully. She also reminded leaders to uphold inclusiveness and rule of law during the transition. Moving on to business headlines, Zambia has started accepting China's yuan for mining taxes, becoming the first African nation to do so. The acceptance of yuan enables Zambia to service its Chinese debts more cost-effectively. The Bank of Zambia confirmed that payments in renminbi began in October, marking a significant shift in how Africa's second-largest copper producer manages its mining revenues. Bloomberg reported that Chinese mine operators are now setting part of their tax obligations in yuan, reflecting the growing role of China as both Zambia's biggest copper buyer and one of its largest creditors. The central bank said the change aligns with its reserve management strategy and export realities. A large portion of copper exports go to China, and the Chinese mining firms already receive some, if not all, of their payments for their exports to China in renminbi, the Bank of Zambia said. The Bank of Zambia has the diversification and build-up of its reserves as a key objective, in purchasing renminbi enables the bank to actualize its objective. The bank added that holding yuan also makes it cheaper to service Chinese debt, saying it would allow Zambia to service its debts to China in a more cost-effective manner. The Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry has called for policy consistency, micro, small, and medium enterprises, protection, and private sector-led growth to strengthen Nigeria's economy in 2026. The president of the chamber, Chief Emeka Obogolu, made the call in New Year message by ACCI Media and Strategy Officer Ms. Olayemi John Mesa on Thursday in Abuja. Obogolu said consistent policies and private sector-friendly reforms were critical to reducing the cost of doing business and achieving sustainable economic development. He emphasized the need for strong protection of MSMEs, describing them as the backbone of the Nigerian economy. According to him, sustained stakeholder engagement and predictable reforms would encourage investment and business expansion. The ACCI president said the organized private sector remained cautiously optimistic about business opportunities in 2026, noting that the optimism persisted in spite global and domestic economic pressure affecting businesses. He commended Nigerian businesses for their resilience and adaptability in navigating the economic challenges of 2025, adding that businesses demonstrated commitment to innovation and value creation despite inflation and foreign exchange volatility. Finally, to sports. As the Super Eagles gear up for their last 16 clash against Mozambique at the 2025 Africa Cup of Nations, striker Victor Osimhen was among 3 players absent from the squad's New Year's Day training session. The other players who missed the session were Ryan Alebiosu and Cyril Dresseres. Head coach Enrique Chale confirmed that the team trained behind closed doors on Thursday, and the absentees noted. Both Alebiosu and Dresseres were carrying injuries and are considered unlikely to feature against Mozambique. Osimhen, on the other hand, was reportedly given a rest as part of the coaching staff's careful load management strategy, with the Nigerian talisman being closely monitored to maintain peak fitness. The Super Eagles are looking to continue their impressive run in Morocco, with expectations high for Osimhen to lead the attack should he feature against the Southern African side. Let's take a look at the weather forecast across Africa. That's all for this hour. Before I conclude, I would like to invite you to watch our weekly program Roundup, which is coming up next. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.
The 39th AU Summit in February 2026 will focus on peace, security, economic integration via African Continental Free Trade Area, sustainable agriculture, climate resilience, digital progress, human development, and strengthening partnerships to promote stability, growth, and Africa's global influence. Today's roundup previews the key topics expected at the summit in Addis Ababa. I'm your host, Gamachi Samandira, with Zalalem Ibaldal joining me today. Stay with us. Hello, Zalalem.
Hello, Gamach. Thank you.
Good to have you on this program.
Good to have you as well.
Yeah. Well, Zalalem, the African continent, of course, have had, both challenges and opportunities in the year 2025, and we are in the year 2026. And of course, I just would like to say Happy New Year. We're still celebrating the New Year, yeah? Yeah, and of course, Africa has been dealing with, a lot of variables, a lot of factors that affected its development, its prosperity. And these are, the things African leaders are expected to respond to during this summit, the 39th AU Summit. If we take, peace and security and stability, this is, one of the most pressing issues that the African continent is affected by. And fragile governance and weak institutions, economic disparities and unequal integration, and climate change and environmental challenges, and many others, of course. And when you see these factors and many others, what do you think will be entertained, of course, in relation to advancing peace and security across the African continent?
Thank you very much. Lots of ideas, lots of challenges and opportunities, as you rightly put. But before that, this is our first roundup discussion in 2026.
Exactly.
I want to express my best wish for our audience, for our viewers, subscribers, residing in different parts of the world, and I wish a very successful and productive year. Between 21st of February to 22nd of February, African leaders, presidents and prime ministers are expected to come here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and deliberate on some of the pressing challenges of Africa. Of course, peace and security has continued to be an enduring challenge for Africa. Since the African Union, the late Organization of African Unity, was established in 1963, the issue of peace and security in Africa has continued to be the core agenda of African leaders. There has never been a time for Africa when the continent has been free or far from peace and security challenge. So today, for example, as we speak, lots of people are dying because of lack of security. We can see the challenge of peace and security in Eastern Africa, for example, in Sudan, and we encountered enormous challenge of security in West Africa because of coups and democratic change of governments, like in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and many other countries of Africa. So peace and security is a challenge. Leaders of Africa are expected to come up with innovative ideas and solutions to tackle this peace and security challenge.
There must be, of course, a question that needs to be raised, which is, why is, this happening in many parts of Africa? And we have, both covert and overt variables and, of course, actors as well. Well, Africa is, a continent with enormous resources. We've always been saying that, of course, there are bodies, there are institutions, there are maybe, I'm afraid, countries, behind all this. And so what should African countries do about it? And then African countries, need to give priority to their respective countries' peace and security. And rather than, of course, giving priority to their own interest. And now African leaders are expected to deal with the causes of peace and security challenges in the African continent, and they need to pose a question, which is why is Africa being affected just the way it is? Why is no peace in different countries in the African continent? And before you just go deep, okay, you of course find out the answer, the response, which is there are interests of many parties, and African leaders need to discover who they are exactly, and they need to give just some kind of response to this situation.
Sure. So, as you elaborated interestingly, governments, peace and security should be the core agenda of African leaders, and they need to question why peace and security is always the top agenda of Africa. I mean, the African Union has put lots of effort in peace and security. Even in its Agenda 2063, the African Union has made peace and security top agenda. Thus, the African Union wants to see a peaceful and secure Africa by 2063. And of course, the African Union has put enormous strategies, mechanisms, and approach to make sure that the continent Africa is free from insecurity and lack of peace by 2063. And one of the approaches, of course, to promote the culture of dialogue. The culture of dialogue. Apparently, any problem, any conflict, disagreement, and dispute can be best solved by dialogue. And as we know, Africa has rich resource in this regard, rich wisdom in approaching, in solving, resolving conflicts, and a peaceful means through dialogue and through peaceful discussion. So African countries need to revitalize those wisdoms and to make sure that their continent is peaceful and secure. The other mechanism and the other strategy pursued by the African Union is to promote the culture of peace and tolerance. This seems a weak approach, but it's very strong and everlasting approach. To realize lasting peace and security in Africa, we need to promote the culture of peace and security, the culture of peace and tolerance. And the African Union is trying to give the lesson of the culture of peace and tolerance in the form of education. Some problem can be a problem in you as long as it's your culture, as long as it's your habit. If you are able to break that culture and habit, and if you can successfully replace the old culture, the old habit with the new one, it can no longer be your problem. So in Africa, what kind of culture we have developed so far is the culture of fighting, the culture of conflict, and the culture of ascending to power and position, to government position through fighting, through defeating rivals, through battlefield in fighting, through war, and to come to government positions through violence, chaos, undemocratic ways. So we need to break that culture. We need to come up with a new culture of peace and tolerance. So the African Union is promoting the idea and the culture of peace and tolerance. And I think that's very much practical. It's not unrealistic agenda and unrealistic approach. So African countries need to accustom to the habit and culture of peace and tolerance. And the African Union is spearheading this agenda. And one important thing you brought is the lack of strong institution has been the major impediment of peace and security. Lack of institutions. That means lack of democracy, for example. Democracy is defined by many scholars and elites, but one of the dominant definition and one of the widely accepted definition is the definition given by the late president of United States of America, Abraham Lincoln. He said democracy is a form of government by the people and for the people. And if you take the two phrases, by the people, the government needs to come from the people. The people need to elect their leaders through universal suffrage. And that means the government and leaders shouldn't come through chaos, violence, and undemocratic change of government through coups, for example. Government leaders need to come to that position through election in a democratic means. And the other phrase from the late president of United States, Abraham Lincoln, is for the people. If there is democracy, the government needs to work for the people. That suggests that the government needs to prioritize the interest of their people, the interest and the benefits of the people who puts them into that government position. So African countries need to install democratic system, and they need to also nurture a democratic system. This is what we are lacking right now. For example, if you see Western African countries, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and other African countries, there is a trend of coup and undemocratic change of government. And of course, the African Union is taking measure and extra step to make sure that democratic principles and norms are upheld in countries of Africa.
Yes, Zalal. Economic disparities and unequal integration have to do very much to do with democratic principles and procedures, or utilizing democratic principles and laws. So, of course, you've said that the late American president, of course, insisted having or giving democracy for the people. Yes, but what does it mean when you truly give democracy for the people? It means that their interests, their benefits, what they deserve are secured by democratic procedures. Yeah, and when it comes to Africa, of course, you've mentioned that we have more coups in African countries than elsewhere. Why is it that? Because African governments are encouraged to involve coups because it benefits them at the end of the day. And if we take in 2025, we've had many coups in different parts of Africa, and that power, that political power, when they come to the front and when they take or when they assume office, power in the office, of course, they ensure their benefit, which means they are taking the people's right, and that's not democratic, that's undemocratic. And of course they benefit in the expenses of the people, the African people. And this has very much of course just to do with right, economic right, political right. Okay, so African leaders in this 39th AU summit are expected to deal with this. And of course one remedy for this is that enhancing economic integration and transformation. Yeah, because when you have integrated economic movements, activities in different parts of Africa, and then people will have a chance to have economic benefit, and that will make them deviate from engaging in anything that affects peace and security in the continent. So yeah, what can we say about this? Of course, economic integration and transformation is one big aspect that is expected to be addressed during this summit, this 39th AU summit. And what do you think are, of course, the topics to be raised in this regard?
Sure, Gamage. Economics and politics are integrated.
Of course, that's what I've been saying,
Yeah,
yes.
Well put. So like the late president of Ghana and major advocate of African integration and African unity, Kwame Nkrumah, he's a famous Pan-Africanist from Ghana, and he said that political independence is not guaranteed without economic integration. And African forefathers used to advocate a common market in Africa, and their aspiration was to see Africa whereby Africans trade with each other with a single currency. So Africans need to come to integration, need to come to one in terms of trade. And there are so many initiatives in Africa, including the African Continental Free Trade Area, which sought to unite more than 1.3 billion peoples of Africa through trade and through economy. So economic integration is very vital. As you said, during the 2026 African Union Summit, leaders of Africa will spotlight this super important agenda of the continent, economic integration. I mean, we have seen regional organizations in various parts of Africa. In East and South Africa, we do have COMESA, common market for Eastern and Southern Africa. In South Africa, we do have Southern African Development Community. In West Africa, we do have ECOWAS, Economic Community of Western African States, and there are so many other regional organizations which are doing to integrate Africans, to integrate the respective region through trade and economy. So this agenda of economic integration is very much fundamental to Africa. In fact, this is one of the mechanisms that can realize prosperity in Africa. You know, political independence, political liberation is not enough. Political independence is going to be guaranteed if there is economic independence. You know, many African countries are, for example, now living in loans. They have received billions of dollars from the West and the East, and you know, they are in a kind of debt trap. So this is a classical definition of neo-colonialism. I mean, though African countries got their independence from their colonizers in the 1960s and 1970s, they can't break the yokes of colonialism, the shakes of colonialism, because of lack of economic independence. So they need to realize their economic prosperity, and one of the approach could be economic integration. And they need to realize economic integration. And the African Union needs to spearhead this economic integration agenda, of course, through the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the largest free trade area in the entire world. The African Union is trying to integrate Africa, and there are so many initiatives besides the African Continental Free Trade Area. So I believe African integration is not far, as long as African leaders are committed to it. And of course, there are the issue of infrastructure, such as the issue of transportation, energy, and so on, for African countries to be integrated. You know, African integration is not the agenda that can be realized with dreams. You know, it needs practical work. It needs practical effort. Like, for example, integrating Africa through transportation, through railway, through road and air transport. So African leaders need to be committed, and it's great that one of the agenda of the 2026 African Union Summit is going to be economic integration.
Yes, Zelalem, I just want to add, you know, boosting intra-African trade. For example, we have, you know, countries, you know, that share, you know, borders. And of course, you know, if you take the Horn of Africa, in the Horn of Africa, many countries, of course, you know, like the cases elsewhere, they share borders, and there are, you know, trade transactions that take place, you know, between people, okay, in respective countries, you know, along the border. And there is, you know, this colonial map. These colonial maps, you know, limit the trade transaction, you know, that possibly can take, you know, between the people in countries, you know, that share borders. And this calls for, you know, African countries to be pragmatic in a way that since, you know, these border crossing, you know, traders or people, they are very much interconnected with one another in many aspects, socially, economically, and even politically. These governments need to find, you know, a way to allow to lose, you know, these tensions that are likely to happen as they, of course, you know, do trade transaction between them. For example, we have cattle. They trade, you know, cattle, and they sell, you know, food, crops, you know, and when this happens, you know, when politics comes in without considering the fact that, you know, these people behave as if, you know, just they live in one same country, but at the same time, you know, you have two different countries, three different countries where these transactions take place, and the two, you know, just they collide. These two things collide. The fact that, you know, these people depend on one another very much economically, they trade with one another, and at the same time, they have, you know, different policies, trade policies, economic policies, and of course they determine, you know, just the kind of tariff you put on them, the governments put on them, how, you know, trade, you know, happens, you know, between these people, and at the same time, you know, these people live together as if they live in one single country. And traders, you know, that live across the borders, you know, they suffer a lot. And these kinds of challenges, need to be addressed by respective countries.
Yes, yes, Gamets, you have touched upon the realities of the Horn of Africa and Eastern Africa.
Exactly.
I mean, this region, the Eastern Africa, is of course the region that's not economically integrated. If you compare the region with other regions, for example, West Africa, trade and economic integration in East Africa, I would say, is weak. For example, if
it
you
is
see,
very weak.
yes, if
it
you
is
see
very
trade
weak.
between
And
Somalia and
Eritrea,
Eritrea,
I think similar things happen elsewhere. With SADC as well, similar things, not exactly the same.
Not exactly the same, but there are promising regional integrations in Africa. We need to mention this. As I said, for example, trade between neighboring countries of Somalia and Eritrea is very insignificant, I would say. But for example, if we see trade and economic integration between countries of West Africa, it's much higher. For example, because of the existence of the regional organization, Economic Community of Western African States, ECOWAS, West African countries are able to trade with each other with ease. For example, Ghanaian companies, Ghanaian industries can access Nigerian market, huge market. Of course, the largest population in the entire continent and huge GDP there in Nigeria. So Ghanaians could access Nigerian market with ease, without tariff, by the way, without tariff, because of ECOWAS.
So the same practice need to replicate elsewhere.
Exactly. The other example could be, for example, there in the West African soil, Burkina Faso can access Cote d'Ivoire port, the port of Ivory Coast, the port of Cote d'Ivoire, without any sophisticated custom procedure, for example. That needs to be replicated in East Africa. For example, Ethiopia is a landlocked country, the largest landlocked country in the entire world, with a population of 130 million and above. But there are ports, there are sea access in the region through Eritrea, through Somalia, through Djibouti as well. Eastern Africa needs to really integrate with each other. Otherwise, prosperity and development in the region will be very far. So economic integration is agenda for 2026 African Union Summit, and leaders of Africa need to give special emphasis.
When this economic integration happens between and amongst African countries, it's very much likely that it will be a win-win situation. Because you can deal with how you do it. You can have policies, procedures that ensure everybody wins in that particular transaction. And for instance, you have surplus products somewhere, some part of Africa, and somewhere else there is the demand of for that product. And when you don't have the infrastructure and the integration, then you can't distribute just these resources to places where they are needed the most. So, and even there are cases where you have, for instance, some crops, they get spoiled because they're not transported to places that are needed on time or in time. And Africa is a continent with enormous resources, and these resources, unfortunately, due to lack of policies that allow their exchange, most of them are not fully harnessed, and as a result there is of course a loss of resources, and people also will suffer. People won't have the benefit if those policies are in place to allow them to transaction, to trade them. And this is I think a very important thing that is likely to be addressed during this Africa Union, the 39th AU Summit.
Sure.
Well, Zelalem, I just would like to take you to the next topic, which is agriculture and food systems strategy, CAADP 2026 to 2035. This is very much likely to be addressed during this summit. And what is it that Africa is likely to have from Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program 2026 to 2035, and what is likely to be discussed with regard to agriculture and food system strategy in general?
Yes, we shouldn't continue to mourn like Africa is rich but Africans are not. This is the idea that wants to express and indicate the fact that Africa has abundant natural resource necessary to propel economic growth and necessary to develop the continent. But Africans are poor, because they couldn't harness their own natural resources. So African leaders need to give a special focus for bringing mechanisms and approach and commitments, of course, to harness the natural resource resides in their respective countries. Recently our POA, Blame Bekele, has spoken and interviewed the African Union Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Development, Moses Vilakati. Moses Vilakati said, Africa has huge potential in agriculture, but still Africans are importing food from outside.
Yeah, we are still importing huge amounts of food to Africa, and it cannot continue like that. And we are spending over between 50 to 100 billion US dollars importing food. And we're looking at all means possible to say which one can now help us to make sure that production and productivity gap can be reduced.
Agriculture is, of course, a backbone of African economy. Africans get huge amount of money from agriculture in the form of foreign exchange. It's a major source of foreign currency for Africa, and millions of African, significant part of African population engaged in agriculture. So it's of course becoming a major source of employment. Agriculture for Africa is the lifeline for African countries, but Africans are not utilizing their resource. That's a paradox.
Yeah, it's a paradox. And even, in many parts of Africa, stunting is
it's a basic problem.
Yeah, the basic problem. And it's because, because of malnutrition. We can't hide it. It's a fact. It's because, African countries are not producing enough for their citizens. And why is it the case? Why still Africa has, arable land, extended arable land, but still it cannot feed its peoples, enough. It cannot, it couldn't produce, enough to feed its people. And one of course, the reasons is that Africans are not producing in surplus, and at the same time, they haven't so far, properly dealt with adding value to the produce, to the agricultural producers. And the approach of agricultural productivity needs to change.
Yeah,
in many
by the way,
countries.
this is one of the points that was mentioned by Moses Vilakati in our interview with the African Union Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Development, Moses Vilakati. One of the basic idea raised was the issue of transforming African agriculture to agribusiness. Moses Vilakati said, we need to transform agriculture to agribusiness. What we know in Africa is agriculture, but we need to transform it to agribusiness.
I usually say to people, we talk about agriculture, but maybe it's about time we talk about agribusiness. Because when we talk about agriculture, it means just the culture of farming. Agriculture. So it's the culture of farming. And yet when we look at it from an agribusiness, we are saying it's a business in agriculture.
So agriculture in Africa is performed and practiced as a culture, as a tradition, as a way of life. But Africa needs to transform it to agribusiness. Agriculture needs to be a sector, needs to be a field by which Africans transform their livelihood, transform their living. So, in fact, African countries need to pursue and need to practice modern agriculture. For example, precision farming, smart irrigation, and artificial intelligence. For example, African countries can use artificial intelligence in agriculture. With the aid of artificial intelligence, for example, African farmers can predict what will hold the next months. I mean, what kind of weather condition will that specific area experience in the next week, in the next 2 weeks, in the next months. So if African countries, I mean, if African farmers can predict the weather condition of their locality, you know, they can adjust their farming practice to that specific realities.
Yeah, Zelalem,
yeah.
Excuse me to interrupt you.
No problem.
Of course, Africa needs to adapt and adopt very good practices, best practices from the advanced world. We can't help it. Well, the case of agriculture, if you just go back to, you know, the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000, and now throughout these years, you know, it has always been changing until now. Especially, you know, the impact of, you know, climate change has been very much prominent, prevalent as well. I mean, it has been, you know, taking place in many African countries, especially. We know African countries are not those, you know, that emit, you know, too much carbon monoxide into the atmosphere.
Exactly.
But they suffer from the impact of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide emission that take place, you know, elsewhere, especially, you know, in the advanced world. The USA, China, Europe, you know, of course, they are responsible for this because, you know, they use fuel, this fossil fuel especially, and their factories, their industries emit too much carbon monoxide, too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And unfortunately, we don't know how to deal with these emissions, but they do. And that's why, you know, they have not been, you know, affected as much as Africa has been affected. And so this is, you know, just the cause for low agricultural productivity. And when we have low agricultural productivity and people in Africa, you know, just they scramble for resources, for agricultural products. And of course, we see that, you know, agricultural products, their prices rise on a daily basis in the African continent. The birth rate is so much high, yeah?
Yeah.
And African countries, you know, when they try to feed, you know, their people, especially, you know, these newborn babies and children, you know, most of them young people who are not as productive as adults. And Africa needs to find a way to change, you know, the way it deals with, you know, agriculture. And I remember some time ago, you know, a Kenyan professor was talking about the impact of climate change, how it impacted agricultural productivity. And if it was not, of course, for the adoption and adaptation of technology, they would have been, of course, you know, suffering from the consequence of climate change. And she just gave example that, you know, in Kenya, farmers began, you know, employing technology in their agriculture practices, and later they could cope up with the impact of climate change. Okay, so what is, you know, what is it that, you know, African countries are doing respectively? Any African country, if they just remain practicing, you know, this traditional way of doing agriculture, is going to be, you know, a big challenge. And maybe famine, okay, hunger is going to be, you know, one very common scenario in the African continent. And 2026 is expected to come up with new approach to agriculture.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that leads us to the next agenda of the 2026 African Union Summit, which is, like you introduced in the beginning, climate resilience effort. You know, African countries need to build a climate resilient economy. You know, African economy is very much prone to the effect of climate change. As you said, African countries contribute very less to greenhouse gas emission, less than 4% to the global greenhouse emission, but African countries are very much affected by the impact of climate change. But recently, African leaders are showing enthusiasm to be part of solution for climate change. For example, the second African Climate Summit was conducted in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, a few months ago. And during that time, Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed said African countries are becoming part of solution. And he, of course, substantiated his idea with the example in Ethiopia. For example, Ethiopia has been able to plant more than 48 billion trees over the past 7 years. And Ethiopia has shown steadfast commitment to the fight against global climate change. So African countries, African leaders are showing commitment to the fight against climate change. But this is a global issue, and African countries, through their continental organization, African Union, need to work with the other part of the world so that we can save the planet, and that planet will serve us all. The idea of climate change is connected to agriculture, and our agriculture has been suffered from the impact of climate change. For example, desertification, soil erosion, drought, and other problems are directly the consequence of climate change. So African countries need to work to withstand the impact of climate change, and they need to also follow strategies and approaches to fight against climate change. One of the approach might be planting tree, and the other could be, of course, green mobility, for example.
You've mentioned it very well, of course. I just would like to, of course, to tell you that there are climate resilient initiatives worth mentioning. For example, the Great Green Wall Initiative in the Sahel region, a massive reforestation project spanning 8,000 kilometers, across 20 countries. And this is, a very good practice. Kenya's Climate Smart Agriculture, CSA, it involves, of course, adoption of drought-tolerant crops such as millet and sorghum. South Africa's Renewable Energy Program, and of course, it's development of wind and solar power plants to reduce reliance on coal. Okay, and this mitigates, of course, emission, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide emission. Uganda's climate resilient fisheries and promoting sustainable fishing practices and establishing, climate resilient fish farming techniques. Okay, and when it comes to, Ethiopia, of course, implementing community-based rainwater harvesting, soil conservation, and agroforestry to improve local resilience to droughts and floods. Okay, so these are very good practices that other African countries, can replicate in their respective, countries. And as I said earlier, these climate resilient initiatives need to be, examined, and ways must be, of course, discovered or identified to make, things better, to come up with, better outcomes. And last and not least, of course, this time, practical measures are expected from African leaders.
Practical measures.
Practical measures. Because African leaders, they don't have problems with, having policies, beautiful policies, and even, they allocate, budgets. But when it comes to its implementation, we always have been, receiving, bad reports. Most of the time. For example, corruption is there, lack of commitment is there. And so African leaders need to value what outcomes we will have, from this summit, and they need to be committed enough to implement them, to involve, proper people, and to give priority to the most important projects and decision-making processes. If that is done, of course, Africans will be successful in what they aim to achieve.
The 2026 African Union Summit is scheduled to be held between 21st of February to 22nd of February 2026. Yes. Here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at the headquarters of African Union. Like we said, African head of states and governments will come to Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and will deliberate on the agendas that we entertained, like peace and security issues, economic integration, agriculture, climate resilience activities, and practical measures, like you said. As you rightly said, Gamachis, African Union, the summit should never be a platform whereby African head of states and government gather and deliver speech and take some photos and, take the agenda that way. So they need to show practical commitments, and they need to translate words into action. Yes. They need to walk their talk.
Exactly, Zelalem. I think we wrap today's roundup right here. Okay. Viewers, thank you very much for watching today's roundup, which ends right here. Next time we'll come up with similar important issues. Until then, goodbye.